we do any actual combat, all our members should be in appropriate kit. So we're going to start off with a proper authenticity kit check. So since we have a warrior here who is from a Norwegian heritage, we're going to look at the helmet. Does he have a proper helmet suitable for combat? Now there needs to be a steel helmet or a leather helmet, such as this one back here. Now the leather helmet, as you can see, is leather on the inside. This one's covered with a hat. It doesn't have to be covered with the hat as long as it's made to an authentic pattern or design. Now primarily, since we have a Viking here, we're looking for somebody with a spectacled helm or a Spangen helm like I'm wearing. You see he has a linen under tunic on and he has a woolen over tunic on, kirtles. He has a leather belt with appropriate buckle and strap in. These here are made out of horn. He has to have a knife, plus a secondary weapon. This knife, however, is sharp, so we're going to remove it from the field, since we don't allow sharps on the combat field. Next, we're going to move down. His trousers need to be made of linen or wool, just like the kirtle needs to be made of linen or wool. His trousers are again made of wool. And then he has appropriate boots to his character or persona. As you notice, his persona then is a Norwegian. He has Jorvik style boots. And then he has his small pouch here on the side. Additionally, he has to have a weapon, be it the axe. In addition to his axe, he has to have a shield. See here he has armored combat gloves. These have a nice 13 to 15 ounce grade, armor grade leather on the outside of the glove. Now we've gone over authenticity just a little bit. We're going to start talking about weapon specs. Now if you look at weapon specs and safety. So let's look at our warrior from head to toe. Start off at the head. You notice he has a suitable helmet that offers quality protection. Steel helmet. You can also wear a leather helmet. Either one's okay. If you wear a leather helmet though, it needs to be made of 13 to 15 ounce leather, armor grade leather. Make sure it provides that suitable protection. Now we're going to move on down. As you move on down, we're going to start at the arms. Your warrior can wear vambraces. Our vambraces may look something like this. Even though they're not period accurate, we still encourage warriors to wear them to protect the forearms, since their forearms can be easily broken if struck by a weapon. So when you wear them, make sure that you wear them underneath the garment. Now we're going to move on down to the hand. With the hand, you see that the warrior is wearing an armored glove. Just a regular work glove that's been covered with 13 to 15 ounce armor grade leather to provide adequate protection to the hand in case it gets accidentally struck. Moving on to the other side, we have the warrior's shield. Now as you notice, the shield here has a rim. The key thing is that all shield rims need to be either made of one of three materials, either rawhide, vegetable tan leather, or steel. Now with rawhide and vegetable tan leather, they'll be tacked on into place. The key thing here is you check the shield rim. You want to make sure that it's free of any nails that might be sticking out that would cause you to catch or tear flesh. Now with a metal shield rim, you want to make sure that the overall shield rim itself is free of any nicks or burrs, and likewise for the rivets as well, that would cause you to catch or tear flesh. As we move on to the shield boss, you want to make sure that the shield boss still has good structural integrity. Make sure it hasn't been torn or ripped open or pierced through, so as it protects the hand. And you want to make sure that it's riveted in place, secured in place properly, and that the rivets aren't sticking out, causing a hazard to your opponent. Now we've covered basic protection equipment. Let's move down just a little bit lower. You have the possibility of a cup or a cricket box that you can wear on the groin area to protect your groin area. And additionally, you can wear shin guards, be it modern soccer shin guards or something of that nature, as long as they're worn underneath the clothing. So we're going to start first with the axe. The axe itself here should have all points rounded off to the diameter of a dime, as you can see here. The front edge of the blade, the cutting edge, needs to be a 3mm thickness, with the overall arc being no sharper than that of 180 degrees and arc can be shallower but not sharper than. The axe head itself needs to be fitted onto the axe haft properly, either being fitted from the bottom up so it doesn't slide off, or riveted in place. As you can see here, it's done by both techniques. Now for the combat seaxe, you'll notice the point needs to be no sharper than the diameter of a dime. The blade itself needs to have a 2mm edge. The last 1/3 of the blade can be up to a 1mm thickness. And that's the overall dimensions of the blade. Now for a sword, the same dimensions and specifications required for the seaxe apply to the sword. Again, point is no sharper than the diameter of a dime. The edge has at least a 2mm edge, with the last 1/3 of the blade being a 1mm edge. And for spears, with the spear here, you can see it needs to be a 3mm edge coming to no sharper than the diameter of a quarter, or have a bulbous point. This one here has a bulbous point. Spearhead needs to be securely riveted, fixed onto the spear shaft. And then you need to check the spear shaft, just make sure it's free of any fractures or splinters that would cause it to break in the middle of combat. Now, for weapons length, the spear shaft and the overall spear could be no longer than 5 feet 6 inches for a one-hand spear. For a two-hand spear, it can be up to 7 feet 6 inches. And for javelins, it can be 4 feet 6 inches. For a long axe or a Dane axe, again, we're looking for a 3mm edge with all points rounded off to the diameter of a dime. It being securely fastened onto the axe haft. This technique here is riveted on. And again, just checking the axe haft for any splinters or fractures that would cause the integrity of the haft to actually break during combat. Also with this, you're making sure it doesn't have an arc any sharper than 180 degrees in nature. Now on to target areas. There are 3 main classifications of target areas within combat. You have the band areas, the off-target areas, and target areas. So first we'll start off with the band areas. The band areas start with the head, the neck, the forearms, the hands, the groin, the lower leg, and the foot. It also extends to include all joints. Never strike an opponent directly on a joint. Now for off-target areas. Off-target areas are primarily for the upper arm. Off-target areas should be avoided. However, if you're in front of an audience, take the shot, act it out. Otherwise, you ignore an off-target area shot. Now for target areas, it's broken into 2 main classifications, the chest and the upper leg. With the chest, it's defined from collarbone to shoulder to waistline. With the chest, you have thrust and cuts. With the upper leg, however, it's defined from the waist just above the knee. And you're limited to cuts only for the thigh. As I turn my warrior around here, key thing is when you're fighting your opponent, you never directly cut them across the back for fear of hitting the spine, which runs top to bottom here. So when you make a cut across your opponent, you want to make sure you hit him with the flat of the blade or cut across his backside, or then go for the thighs. Now we're going to move on to footwork and the fighter stance. Beginning first with the fighter stance. The key thing here is that you start off with a good stance, feet shoulder width apart, maybe slightly more than shoulder width apart. So you have a good solid base, knees bent. Now when you're in your offensive stance, your weapon foot is going to be a half step forward. When you're in your defensive stance, your shield foot is going to be a half step forward. The key thing here with the arms though, you want to make sure the elbows are tucked at the side. With the weapon, You want to make sure the forearm's extended out and the weapon is slightly tilted forward so that you're prepared to receive any attacks that come at you on your weapon side. With the shield side, you want to make sure that the forearms are extended out so you're prepared to receive any attacks. You have a little shock absorption there. And also that your shield is slightly tilted forward. The key thing with this is, if an attack comes in and the shield's slightly tilted forward, you're going to stop the attack or you're going to direct it downwards. If it's tilted back towards your face, it's likely to guide the shot up towards your face or towards your buddy's face to your left or right. Key thing here is always safety. Now we've talked about a good fighter stance. Let's move on to footwork. We have two techniques. The first technique I'm going to teach you is passing through. This is where you walk normally like you would. Left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. You're making sure your foot's firmly planted on the ground before your weapon strikes your opponent. So it looks something like this. Notice on each of those shots, the foot was firmly planted on the ground before a shot would have struck my opponent. The second technique I'm going to teach you is called the shuffle technique. So you start off in either your fighter stance, or in your fighter stance either offensive or defensive. And you're going to bring the rear foot up to the forward foot, send the forward foot, rear foot up, and keep moving across the field like so. When you're retreating, you bring the forward foot to the rear foot, like so. So with strikes, it'll look like this. Now both techniques are acceptable. Passing through is more widely used throughout Viking Age reenactment combat. The key thing I want you to understand about this is you have two options. With the shuffle technique, you have both feet mostly on the ground throughout the entire movement. This gives you a slight advantage if your opponent kicks you in the shield, tries to knock you off balance, or if he moves into a grapple with you. Key thing again is just keep both feet firmly planted on the ground so you're not caught off guard. Passing through allows you to move quicker, then you can be caught off guard. Alright, now we're going to move on to the 8th combat system. Working through all 8 strikes. The first strike aims towards the head. Just remember, when we cover our target areas, that the head is a forbidden area, so you never actually strike your opponent's head, even if they're wearing a helmet. In which cases, they should always be wearing a helmet. So, as the head strike comes in, you stop short, or if you need to, you redirect it towards the left or right shoulders accordingly. Now I'm going to begin with the good fighter stance, weapon foot slightly forward. I'm going to get my distance. Remember that the longer weapon always sets the distance. It's the advantage of the longer weapon. So I'm going to come in, first shot, weapon's behind my back or overhead. The arm here is signaling that I'm going for a headshot. I'm going to come in, strike towards the head. Remember, always stop short. The second shot comes with the wrist going across the face. The wrist should actually be at the ear. What I'm doing here is I'm going to strike from my opponent's shoulder to his hip. So shot 2. Now shot 3 has my arm out here at the side. And diagonal motion, I'm going to chop through from shoulder to hip. Remember, your first 3 attacks are in a chopping motion. They're overhead. You're chopping down. Now that I've cut through here, I'm going to flip the wrist over and cut across the stomach. Now that I'm on the other side, I'm going to flip the wrist over again, cut across the stomach. I'm going to lower my attack, cutting across the thighs. Switch my wrist over, cut across the thighs, and then I pull back for my thrust. Now when you thrust, you want to make sure that the sword blade is always horizontal and not vertical. The key reason for this is if the blade's vertical, it's likely to glance up towards your opponent's face. If it's horizontal, it'll glance off to the side. So the key thing here is always safety. Now as I prepare to thrust out, I pull back, clearly signaling my opponent that I'm going to thrust. I'm thrusting to his midsection, his abdomen. I'm going to thrust to his weapon side. diagonally across his body so it glances off. Alright. Now the key thing here, though, is always to make sure that when you do thrust, you always do so with the bent arm. So the thrust should be bent arm clearly bent here. That's for your safety and for your opponent's safety. At combat speed, with my opponent squared up against me, it's going to look like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. These are the 8 strikes. And of course you practice them, and with time comes muscle memory and speed. Key thing here, though, is always safety. It's better to go slow and be safe than try and work your way through it too fast and hurt your opponent. So for control, what I want you to do is focus on attacking your opponent's shield and controlling the weight with which you land your blows. So if this is done, for example, when I come in and I strike my opponent's shield, I'm going to let my wrist go limp. As soon as I feel that contact, I'm going to pull through. So for attacks 2 and 3, primarily, I feel it make contact, I let the wrist go limp, and I pull through. Again, I make contact, I feel the wrist go limp, I pull through. Make contact, let the wrist go limp, pull through. Make contact, let the wrist go limp, pull through. And same for the lower attacks. As soon as you feel it make contact, you let the wrist go limp and you pull through. As I pull back for the thrust, though, the key thing here is I'm going to thrust right up until I feel it make contact. And once I feel it make contact, I'm going to pull back. So it's just a quick tap. Alright, make contact, pull back. So once you've done that a few times and you feel comfortable with the control you have against your opponent's shield, have your opponent move his shield aside. I want you to focus on striking your opponent in a controlled manner. Have your opponent give you feedback, as in, you can hit a little harder, you can hit a little softer, but what it should feel like is a hard pat, a hard slap against the chest. Enough so you know you got hit, but not enough to leave welts or bruises. Stop short, attack 2, attack 3, attack 4, attack 5, attack 6, attack 7, attack 8. Now how'd that feel? Perfect. Okay. Okay, so now that you've had a chance to work on your control a bit, we're going to move on to parries. Key thing here with parries is you want to block all the shots at a perpendicular 90-degree angle. So for attack 1, I'm going to come up overhand, and you notice he extends his arm fully out, and we have a 90-degree angle here between the sword and the axe haft. Now if I push on the bind, he lets it slide towards the axe head. And likewise, if you were to attack me, I let it slide towards the cross guard, not towards the sword blade. Concern here is that I would fall off the sword and actually strike my buddy to my left and right in the head. Safety is always key here. So now I'm going to attack him with shot 2. And you notice my opponent's going to block. Again, 90-degree angle. Axe and sword perpendicular. I'm going to pull through. I'm going to come to the other side, attack with shot 3. He brings his arm over and he blocks. Again, axe haft and sword blade meet perpendicular. I cut through. I signal for attack 4. He brings his axe downwards as I cut across the stomach. Hand comes over. Attack for shot 5. He brings it to the other side and blocks. I lower my attack towards the legs for attacks 6 and 7. Lowers his axe a little bit more. And then just transitions it from side to side to block appropriately. Key thing here is keep that arm out there extended to keep your opponent's weapon from you as far as possible. Now that I've attacked shots 1 through 7, I pull back for the thrust. As we get ready to thrust, my opponent comes down and out. Key thing here is bring the weapon down in a circular motion and away. Down and away. Always down and away from you. Never bring it up towards your face, but always down and away. Now when my opponent attacks me, I'll set my shield down for a better view. So attack me. Again, perpendicular, perpendicular, bring it over, blade comes down, blade comes down, blade comes down, blade comes down, and he goes for a thrust, down and away. Remember, safety is key here. Always focus on those shots. Being safe and blocking those shots. You should react to the shots, you shouldn't necessarily anticipate them, but then again your opponent should be signaling everything with the direction of their arms. Alright, now that we've gone over attacks, control, and parries without the shield, let's focus on defense with the shield. So the key thing here is anything that's on the shield side, you're going to block with the shield. So again, I attack with the overhand, my opponent's going to block with his weapon. I attack. For attack number 2, he blocks with his weapon. Attack number 3, he blocks with the shield. Notice he extends the shield out to meet me. I pull through. I go for attack 4. Meets me with his weapon. Attack 5, he blocks with the shield. Attack 6, meets me with his weapon. Attack 7, blocks with the shield. I come in for the thrust. He's going to parry with his weapon. Okay, defense with the shield at combat speed. Remember, blocking everything to your weapon side with the weapon, everything to the shield side with the shield will look like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. Now, watch as my opponent attacks me and watch me defend. Again, everything on the shield side is blocked with the shield. Now we're going to move on to the 8's walking. The key thing here is that you take a step before you strike your opponent. So, I will demonstrate. Now my opponent attacks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So at combat speed, it's going to look something like this. Now we're going to move on to defense against pole arms, defending against the long axe. Key concerns here are that the weight of the axe head itself. If I don't pull my blow very well, I can very easily puncture through my opponent's shield and injure my opponent. So when I go to strike my opponent, generally speaking, he's going to push out that shield as far as he can, get as much distance away from his body as he can. And he wants to absorb that hit right on the shield boss if he can. So he's going to try to maneuver that shield so that the shield boss takes the axe hit rather than the wood. So I'm going to attack, my opponent's going to defend. It should look something like this. You'll also notice he's bracing with his other hand behind the shield because the axe does carry a lot of force behind it. There we go. Now for another attack, attacking attack 2, attack 3. Key concern here is get that shield away from your body, take the hit on the shield boss, stay safe. And if you need to, brace up behind the shield with the other hand if you have to. Alright, the other key thing is I'm going to try and hook my opponent's shield. As I do so, simply just going to twist to the left or right, and I'll lose that hook. Also, if I thrust to the outside, he's just going to do a shield bind, step in, strike for a kill. If I thrust into the other side, you can either shield bind me and step in for a kill, or you can use a downward parry, clearing me away and then striking for a kill. That's basic defense against a long axe. Now my opponent's going to demonstrate defense against pole arms. He's using a long spear. I again have sword and shield, standard combination. He's going to attack the shield side of my shield. And again, just like I did with the long axe, I'm going to step in, shield bind, and strike. When he strikes the weapon side of the shield, or my weapon side, I use a downward parry, step in, and strike. Key thing is, as I move in here, it's a downward parry, wrist flips over, cut into the thigh. Now at this point, my opponent's going to do a technique in order to clear my shield out of the way. As he comes in, he's going to swipe that shield. My key concern is, before he can actually finish that clearing and combine it with the strike, that I follow through, pushing his spear away, binding it with my shield, and cutting into that thigh. So at combat speed, we're going to demonstrate all three, working from left to right, and then with the clear. That's basic defense against pole arms. Defense against missiles. Thrown missiles, you have two types. You have javelins and you have darts. Now, key thing here is defending against javelins. The javelineer, the guy throwing it, he's going to throw it, it's going to come up, it's going to usually arc down. As it comes in towards my opponent, he's going to punch out and push down. So it comes out and then down, knocking it to the ground, keeping him safe. Now you notice that he's going to hunch in behind that shield, keeping his size slightly above the shield rim, just so he has visibility on it, and as it comes close, he's going to punch out and down. So defense against the javelin will look like this. Standard defense against javelin. Okay, now that we've covered defense against javelins, we're going to cover defense against archers. Key thing here is you're going to have direct fire, and then you're going to have volley fire. With direct fire, again, it's much kind of like what we did with the javelins. You're going to keep an eye on it. You see that the archers are getting ready to shoot. And as the archer shoots, you're going to duck your head behind that shield. You're going to wait for the volley fire, or the direct fire, to stop. Alright, now the direct fire is stopped, re-engages, ready for combat. But now he sees that the archers move forward. He's preparing to receive volley fire in the aim of high angle fire. So the key thing here is the archer is going to shoot up high. It's going to come in at a high angle, usually about 45 degrees. It's going to come down. So he's going to drop down onto his knee, behind that shield, bring that shield up overhead. He's going to make sure he's looking down, and definitely not looking up. He's going to wait for the thud to keep impacting the shield. Once the volley fire stops, he's going to stand up slowly, shield still overhead, and then re-engage combat once he's sure that all volley fire is stopped, all archery is stopped.
Going over your basic combat. So when you receive javelins, punch down and out. Receiving arrows from a volley, kneel down with your shield up. And direct fire, down behind the shield, you're going to wait for the fire to end. Now we're going to talk about shield walls, basic shield wall commands, and how to execute them. Basic shield wall commands are shield wall, weapons, march on, and halt. Layfrick will give the commands, we will form the shield wall, and I will explain each command.
Shield wall.
When the command shield wall is given, the warriors will overlap shields so that the warrior to the left has their shield come halfway over on the shield of the warrior to their right.
Weapons.
On the command weapons, the warriors will raise their weapons so they're in an attack position.
March on.
Halt! When marching on, the soldiers or warriors may use their weapons to be against their shields to set a rhythm or cadence for the marching. This helps keep them in step, and also it gives a psychological factor to the warfare. The command halt, all members will take an additional step and stop in place.
Alright, now we're going to cover a little bit of display combat. Basically how to make those flashy kills or how to make those sneaky kills safely. First thing starts off is my opponent is facing the other way. I'm sneaking up on my opponent from behind. So my key target areas I'm going to aim for are either his buttocks or his throat. So the first one is I sneak up behind, I strike him to the buttocks, making a safe kill from behind. My opponent gets back up. Second type of attack I'm going to do from the rear is I'm going to come on behind. I'm going to reach around with my hand that's not in use. I'm going to cuff him underneath the neck, putting my hand underneath his neck. I'm going to reach over with my weapon. I'm going to slice across my hand, across my armored glove, so I'm actually not cutting my opponent's neck. Slice across my hand for safety purposes, so I don't nick his neck. At this point, I just carry my opponent down to the ground and let him die. Now my opponent's on the ground, I have the option to finish him off with a dramatic kill. So you have one of two options. The first option is if I'm facing away from the audience and my back's to them, I can come down and I can thrust to the side of my opponent so I don't actually thrust my opponent. Now if my audience is in clear view, I can grab my hand on the bottom of the point and thrust down in a safe manner so as I don't actually pierce my opponent. These are the basics of display combat kills. From there, it's just a matter of working out a routine, acting it out, make sure it's pleasing for the audience. So you have three main techniques that are used: the slope step, the half incartata, and the full incartata. So first with the slope step. Begins, I'm in my good fighter stance. I'm ready to attack my opponent, but he has his shield in front of him, so I need to maneuver around to his side to open up the target area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lunge to my side. For demonstration purposes, I'm going to lunge to the left first, then to the right. I'm lunging to my left side, my shield side, and it opens up my opponent's side here so I can strike at his leg or at his hip, stomach area. And I can recover back to my fighter stance. Now I also have the option of lunging to the right, slope step to the right. So I can attack that leg or his stomach area. Now if for some reason though that doesn't work for you and you still have trouble maneuvering around your opponent, you can do what's called a half incartata. So first I'm going to talk through it going to your left. Moving off to your left direction, you're going to bring your right foot in front of your left foot, like so. And from here, you're going to bring your left foot out and swing into your opponent at a 90-degree angle. So I should be teed off of my opponent pretty well at this point. Allows me to cut out his flank and at his sides. Going to the right, it's going to look like this. Left foot comes over the right foot turns out, spins out here. So I'm just teed up with my opponent. Again, it allows me to cut at his flank and at his sides. Now, the third move is called the full incartata. The full incartata allows me to actually line myself up next to my opponent, and from there I can grab onto him and grapple with him, or potentially throw my opponent from that position. It also gives me clear exposure to his back for any attacks across the buttocks or against the back. So for the full incartata, it starts off just like the half incartata. Foot comes over in front of the other one, spin out 90 degrees, so I'm teed up with my opponent. Now the forward foot is going to spin backwards, and now I'm side by side with my opponent. If I grab onto him as I spin, I can throw him, or from here I can spin out here. So I'm side by side, and then attack at his back or his buttocks. Now moving to the right side, it's going to look like this. Left foot comes in front of the right, right spins out, left foot spins back, so that I'm side by side with my opponent, bringing me up for any grappling or throws. So there's just 2 or 3 advanced techniques that are available to you to maneuver around your opponent. Now that we've covered the basics, we're going to move on to some advanced techniques. The first of which is attacks with feints. So you'll notice here, if I'm going to attack for an overhead attack, attack 1. I stop short, I don't commit, and I change to a lower portion of my opponent's body, either under his arm or down to his thigh. The whole goal here is just to make him think I'm going to attack at one place and attack somewhere else. So for example, I go to attack his leg, he goes to block here, I come up high under his shoulder. It's nothing too crazy. You just stop short of actually committing fully to the attack, and then change your target area to another part of his body. If you imagine my opponent drawn up into 4 parts, different quadrants, I'm going to attack one quadrant and then transition to another quadrant. So you're just drawing his defense elsewhere. At combat speed, it's going to look something like this. You're just trying to draw his defense elsewhere. We're going to move into circular parries. So in this case, my opponent goes to attack me. He attacks me with the 2. Since we're here already binded, I'm going to push it on the bind, get my opponent to commit. I'm going to push through, circle out, strike. Now he attacks with the 3. Again, I'm going to push through. I have an overbind on my opponent. I'm going to push through and strike. Just going to push through on that bind, circle through, and then strike your opponent. Now, I'm going to cover parry riposte. On a parry riposte, it's whenever I go to make a block, I always want to make a kill off of it. So for example, my opponent attacks me, I try to make every shot an opportunity to counterattack. With every shot that my opponent does, there's always a counter you can do. If he comes in high, I can meet the bind, push off, clear strike. If he comes down low, push off, move in, strike. Or if he comes in again, I can push it away, flip over on the wrist, move in and strike. Just a simple parry riposte, making a counterattack off every defense that you have to do. Now, we're going to move into dodge riposte. The key thing with dodge riposte is it's mainly against the legs. For example, you see my opponent has this leg forward. So as I go to strike in towards this foot here, he's going to step back with that foot, bring his sword overhand, clear it out of the way, and then move in and get a strike. So at combat speed, it's going to look like this. Now my opponent goes to make the same move on my foot. Again, you notice, move the leg out, step step back in, strike. That's a dodge or post. And again, that's primarily for your left and right leg, just depending on which leg's forward. Transition that accordingly as you need to. Now we're going to move into disarms. Key thing here is you have two types. You have your manual disarm and you have your circular disarm. Manual disarm, my opponent goes, for example, with a one attack. Now, that I have here, we're both bound to the attack. I have a strong bind, I push into him, and reach in underneath, thumb facing down, to grab onto his sword pommel. I'm going to push over with my top hand and twist with the bottom hand, taking the sword out of his hand, doing a circular disarm. So at combat speed, it's going to look like this. Now I've disarmed my opponent, I'm able to kill him at will. The next technique, grab an axe. Next technique, you'll notice, is a circular disarm. This is primarily useful when you're using a spear or axe, and that's really easy to hook your opponent's weapon. It can be done with the sword too. It's a little more challenging though. So as my opponent comes in for an attack, I'm going to meet it, bind it, and a strong downward motion, moving out and away, flicking the wrist at the last moment. I'm going to disarm him, pulling the weapon out of his hand. So again, that's going to look like this at combat speed. I've effectively disarmed my opponent. Now at this point, he's open for me to move in, strike, and kill. Now we're going to move on to a little bit of advanced shield work. I grab a shield, my opponent grabs a shield. There are some unique dynamics whenever you're both fighting with shields. The biggest challenge here is how to move around his defense. So for example, my opponent comes in with the number 3 attack. I meet with a sword. I push it in the bind. Now that he's fully committed, I'm going to move in with the shield, bind him up for a shield bind. I'm free to strike. Again, he comes in, for example, with a leg attack. I'm going to meet that shot. I'm going to bind him up, stepping in, pushing that shield against my opponent, and striking through at the leg. Shield binds are a simple concept. The key thing is first, engage, bind with your weapon, bind with the shield, follow through with the strike. So at combat speed, it's going to look like this. And again, simple shield binds. Now my opponent has a shield though. One of my key things is how do I hook his shield? How do I move his shield out of the way? There's two main ways that you can do this. The first is I can kick his shield literally out of the way. So I can come in, he's in a sweeping motion, kick it out of the way, step in and strike. If it comes up, sweep it out, strike. My problem is I make myself vulnerable as I do so. Other techniques and options that you have is I can step in. Using the pommel of my sword, I can hook it over the top rim of his shield, pull it down for a strike, where it's particularly more useful or more effective when you come in attacking at number 4 or number 5, hooking that shield aside, combining it with a strike. The same concept can be applied when using an axe. Come over the top, hook it down, strike, come over the top, hook it, strike, and again you can even use the axe handle, just like you do with the sword, coming in, strike it, hooking it with the axe handle, clearing it, and striking with the axe. So simple techniques to clear that shield out of the way, strike in for a kill. Now some other options that you have are called a wrap attack. These aren't primarily preferred techniques, but they're ways to work around your opponent. So for example, my opponent brings the shield up, he has the sword up, he's in a good defensive posture, and I'm having a hard time working around that shield because he's just blocking everywhere. One way for me to do this is I can lunge to the side, bring my wrist out, flip the wrist over, and cut with the back edge of the sword. Primarily if you have a double-edged blade, this works effectively. So it would look, my opponent having a double-edged blade, he's going to strike me with a wrap attack to the outside of this leg. So he steps forward, wraps it in, and again the same concept applies here. I can use this going over his shoulder. He brings that shield up, I can shoot my arm out, flip that wrist over, and strike over his shoulder. Simple wrap attack, it's a technique to work around your opponent. Other options are, my opponent moves up, he goes to do a strike, I can push that shield directly into his shoulder pocket, freeing up the space, or if I need to, I can do an overhand with the shield, in which I bring the shield up overhand, I cross my weapon arm underneath, I strike that leg, maintaining a solid defense as I do so each time. Shield just comes up like a tabletop, creating a defense. Now moving on to advanced techniques a little bit. One technique is using your sidearm, your seaxe, as a secondary weapon. You can also use a hand axe if you keep a hand axe in your belt. The setup for something like this would be is I'm engaging my enemy, we're fighting, he's attacking me, he hooks that shield, clears it, or a Dane axe hits the shield, destroys it. So for example, my opponent hooks the shield, clears it, and literally pulls it out of my hand. Now I find myself without defense. So I'm going to transition my shield hand to my seaxe and pull it up. I can either hold it downwards, ice pick style, putting the blade against the forearm, and just block all shots of my forearm against the blade like so, or I can grab it like I would normally, placing my thumb on the back edge of the seaxe for better support, and just defend like I would with the sword. So for attacks 1, defend weapon side, attacks 2, weapon side, shield side, I'm going to use that seaxe, defend, weapon side, and again use the seaxe, on the shield side, weapon side, shield side, for a thrust, and again, I can always use the seaxe to make a kill if the opportunity presents itself. Safety is key. The other option is I can withdraw my seaxe here to hold against my forearm like I would an ice pick. Just take all blocks directly on the forearm, or on the seaxe against the forearm. So my opponent attacks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's basic use of the sidearm as a secondary weapon.
Alright, now we're going to talk about using the spear. We're going to start off with the one-handed spear, talk about some of the safety considerations. First up, when you have your spear, you have to make sure that your blade is always up and down unless you're making a side cut. Alright, so when you're poking to the chest of your buddy, always blade up and down. Alright, that's a safety feature. If something goes horribly wrong and you actually puncture through your buddy, the ribs will stop it when it's up and down, whereas if it's flat, it'll shoot straight through. That's not so much a consideration when you have a bulbous point like on this spear right here, but on some of the hand-forged ones, it's definitely an issue. Next issue is as you're holding your spear, you have to make sure your blade's up and down, and your thumb is aligned about 2/3 of the way down on your spear. That way you know where your spear is going. If your thumb is to the left or to the right, you know that your blade is going to be flat to the ground. If it's up or down, you know that it's going to be up and down with the blade. Alright, next we're going to talk about control with the spear. A good way to build control and confidence is to get it, buddy. And what you can do is you can do shield drills. You're going to start off, you're going to take your spear, thumb down the shaft of the spear, in the overhand motion, no higher than the pectoral muscles, no lower than the belly button. You're going to poke 1, 2, transition down, 3, 4. You're going to do that with and without shield. So without shield, it'll look something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. When you do this, you're keeping your arm bent, not locking out your arm, you're not sliding your hand up and down the shaft of the weapon, you're just simply poking it. So overhand, overhand, underhand, underhand. You're going to look for feedback from your buddy. How did that feel? Was it too hard?
I was right on. I could feel right where the spear was. It wasn't too hard. Probably make it a little bit harder and speed up if you wanted to.
Okay. Once you got this mastered, overhand, overhand, underhand, underhand, you have 2 additional shots with the spear. Now you're going to move so your blade is parallel to the ground. You're going to shoot past the leg and draw back with a slicing motion. Shoot past the leg, draw back with a slicing motion. With most spears, which is this one here, you can go as far back as you want. You just draw up the leg. For some of the more advanced spears, like this French slug spear, you have this additional consideration of not hooking your friend with your spearhead. So as you shoot past, you have to keep an eye on it and do it safely. Don't go all the way back and hook them. That's going to cause a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. It's going to get you kicked off the field. Alright. Now that we've done basic shots, here's what it's going to look like at combat speed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Not at the moment.
If you want to defend against another spear, you can always push down and out. Alright? It's real easy. When you have your shield, just block with your shield. Alright, so my opponent has now picked up his sword and shield. I have his shield and his spear. Now, when he comes in to do his attacks, you have to defend appropriately. So if he comes in with a 1, block up high with the shield, or you actually block up high with the spear. When he comes in for a 2, be in perpendicular just like you would with a sword or an axe. I'm going to push off. Same rules apply as with any other weapon when you're doing the 8s with a spear and blocking. That's how you defend against sword and shield. Alright, one thing real quick, we have additional safety notes. When you're doing your overhead attacks, you can only do the first 4 shots. So it's 2 pectoral shots and then 2 abdominal shots. And always to the outside. Your underhand shots cannot go high. Alright? So underhand is always low, overhand is always high. So high and low. High and low. Alright, next we're going to cover using the spear and walking. Basically, it's the same fundamental principles as doing the 8s walking with any other weapon. Get your distance, square off. Just walk. Now going up against a sword and shield with a spear is a little bit different, because he's going to be able to block and control a little bit easier. So you can sweep, clear your spear out, and come back in for the kill. What you want to do is with your spear, you're going to want to work the outside of the rim, pop it open, and go for the kill. Additionally, you can come in, sweep out, go for the kill. Alright, at combat speed, we're going to strike and clear, and then we're going to sweep and clear. So here we go. Alright, now we're going to talk about something a little more advanced, say circular disarm. When you're doing circular disarm, same rules apply. Thumb down the shaft so your blade's perpendicular to the ground, about 2/3 of the way back. You're going to hold your shield where it's comfortable, slightly angled forward, good fighter stance. You're going to actually couch your spear underneath your elbow, so you got a little bit more leverage. You're going to catch your opponent's weapon, pull down and out. With another weapon, do the same thing, catch it, down and out. That's how you do circular disarms with a spear. At combat speed, it looks something close to this.
Oh my gosh, that was so funny.
I borrowed a full dancer. Alright, let's do it again, come on.
Favorite.
You're my favorite. Yeah. Happens to me.
I'm going to go grab the biggest stick I can find.
Let's go.
Dude, these videos will be hilarious.
Well, I have it recorded.
Now we'll demonstrate the fives standing. My demonstrator here, Leifric, will first assume the standing position that has his feet shoulder width apart, knees slightly bent.
They know what a bended knee looks like.
I've got another Viking for you. What do you get when you make a video? Trying to make an internet show.
Stop, my God.
Your turn.
Alright. I've got another sword stick for you.
Are you ready?
Whenever you are.
Now what do you get when a Viking attacks? Coming at you with a Danish axe.
Where's the dancing?
Mommy!
No, seriously, honey, come on. It's been a Viking production.
Sweetheart, you need to listen to me.